what can we expect at the upcoming summit? What key issues will be discussed?
There are a number of key issues that BRICS 2023 will focus on. Firstly, I think it is important to set the background that this BRICS summit it's different from quite a number of other BRICS that had taken place before. It is taking place at a time of geopolitics. We see with the tensions in Europe with Ukraine-Russia conflict. We also see the rise of trade wars, particularly in the United States going for China in terms of tariffs and worsening, decoupling or de-risking, as they put it. We also see a lot of destabilization in terms of building of military blocs, particularly around South China Sea, with the rise of U.S. military alliances with a number of countries in a way of restraining, in their view, restraining or gaining against China that we've seen taking place. I think for Africa, it is quite disturbing in the sense that all the developments in the world, it does not augur well for Africa's development, particularly the lack of consensus within multilateral institutions at United Nations, whether on climate change or any other issue affecting directly on the African continent. So it is in all these contexts that BRICS will focus largely on issues that have a direct implication on the African continent. The need for development as set by United Nations, the Millennium Goals, the SDGs. I think BRICS will play a critical role in terms of availing alternative views, alternative financing in infrastructure, strengthening the voice of the Global South, and the bulk of Global South is on the African continent. Mm-hmm. So we're expecting a bulk of African countries attending, and all the talk about the expansion of BRICS itself, of which some African countries will be eligible, particularly Algeria and Egypt, that has shown keen interest. But beyond the African countries, we also see emerging markets, particularly in Latin America, Argentina, also interested, Iran, Gulf states, UAE, and Saudi Arabia. So all these countries are quite critical. Critical, and BRICS will indeed deliberate on these issues and more.
Mm-hmm. As you said, many important subjects will be discussed. We will delve more into the expansion of BRICS, but before that, we know South Africa is chairing the summit this year. So from your perspective, what does this mean for your country, and what priorities does it give to South Africa?
For South Africa, it is important to be chairing BRICS summit, even though it operates and is a member of BRICS at a level of, a standalone. But South Africa strongly feels that it cannot advance its own interests at the expense of the entire African continent. And therefore, South Africa takes a cue from the AU, and the AU has very clear position on all issues that are going to be discussed. So I think for South Africa, it's an honor, it's a privilege, and it understands that its own foreign policy agenda can be advanced through this important forum, and this summit is quite critical. Russia, India, China, and Brazil are critical members in which South Africa operates at a global stage and has a number of issues, share a number of other platforms that are critical, not just BRICS, G20, and two members of BRICS, Russia and China, are members of United Nations Security Council. So this is quite important on discussions of climate change, and therefore BRICS could also be seen as a platform in which the developing country, Global South, exchange notes and build consensus to have a common position on matters dominated mainly by the Global North, the industrialized countries.
We have learned that so far, 23 countries have officially applied to become new BRICS members, and over 40 nations have expressed their interests in joining the bloc. So what do you think about the expansion of BRICS? Why do you think more and more countries, especially the developing countries, want to be part of this bloc?
BRICS is quite critical for these countries on a number of reasons. You have a sense of importance of consolidating their interests. There's a rise of resource nationalism, where countries are starting to be quite serious about their resources when it comes to oil and the price of oil, when it comes to the usage of the dollar, that they need to trade beyond the dollar. They also want to use other currencies, and therefore BRICS is a platform to do with it. We also have seen an increase in United States and Western countries blocking countries in terms of what we call sanctions or the abuse of global public goods, such as SWIFT with the war in Ukraine, and a number of other issues that the Global South disagrees with. And therefore, I think we're going to see the coalescing, coming together of the Global South, strengthening multilateral institutions, and ensure that there is fair trade and cooperation among themselves. So these are a number of reasons why the Global South is unhappy with the current global order and try to reconfigure the global order so that it benefits all.
One of the objects of the BRICS summit this year is to strengthen economic cooperation among members. And this becomes especially important when the World Bank and IMF have warned that 1/3 of the global economy will be in recession this year. So what business opportunities or economic opportunities will BRICS offer to Africa as well as to the Global South?
I think Africa is open for business. There are a number of opportunities for a number of countries. Through the AU, Africa has a vision of Agenda 2063, which is the core vision, the Africa that we want, in which Africa have stipulated areas in which they need cooperation with the developed countries and BRICS countries. In infrastructure development, the beneficiations of their resources, and ensure that tourism is key, and therefore trade, expansion of trade. So the areas of cooperation are many, and the demands in Africa, the demand for growth, for cooperation in those key areas is expanding. So I think we're going to see a number of countries, your Saudi Arabia, your Iran, your China, your India, Russia, Brazil, all of them have interest in Africa. Also, we see the rise of digital technology, and Africa has the youngest with 1.3 billion people. So it is one of the youngest in terms of age, of people population-wise, as many other parts of the world are aging. Therefore, I think the future markets Africa will be a leading market, and everyone wants to be here with developed countries, Western countries, and global South. So dealing with the crisis of recession, it is through this kind of cooperation that will take economies out of recession, more cooperation, more trade, and also beyond the trade issues of cooperation in culture, people-to-people exchange. It's quite important in bringing peace and security in the world.